6. Norik did not leave his cabin again until time came to retrieve his morning meal. No one spoke to him, especially Captain Casco, who had not forgiven his passenger for leaving the mess near the rail. Norik actually appreciated the lack of conversation, wanting nothing to slow his return to the safety of his room. He had slept fitfully during the night, not only haunted by dreams of Bartok's glory, but now also dread images of Faustin's vengeful spirit come to claim him. Not until the Hawksfire finally set sail did the veteran fighter calm at all. Out on the sea, troubled spirits could certainly not pursue him. In fact, as the ship pushed out onto the stormy waters, it finally began to sound reasonable to Norik that he had imagined the dreadful vision, that what he had taken for Faustin had either been but another Vigerai, for certainly the port lay near enough to their eastern lands, or the complete figment of his own troubled mind. The latter seemed more and more likely. After all, Norik had been both physically and mentally torn apart by the demands of the cursed armor. The memories of not only the tomb, but the slaughter at the inn remained with him. In addition, the warlord's suit had pushed his endurance to the limits and beyond, forcing the soldier to traverse a rough landscape without hardly any rest, and at a pace that would have killed many men. If not for the fact that only part of the effort had been his own, Norik suspected that he would definitely have died along the way. The waves grew choppier as the Hawksfire entered deep waters. With each groan of the hull, Norik became more and more convinced that at some point the sea would crush the worn ship like tinder. Yet somehow, the Hawksfire continued on, riding one wave to the next. In addition, for all their motley outer appearance, Captain Casco and his crew proved quite adept at managing the vessel. They scurried up the ropes, raced across the decks, ever keeping their ship ready to meet the elements. What they could not entirely keep at bay, though, was the storm. It struck but a few hours out, the sky blackening and lightning flashing all about. The winds picked up, bending the masts and trying to rip the sails. Norik, who had finally stepped out, quickly gripped the rail as the sea tossed the Hawksfire to the side. "Starboard!" called Casco from the deck. "Starboard!" The man at the wheel worked to obey, but wind and water battled against him. A second crew member came to his aid, the pair managing to fulfill the captain's orders after great effort. Rain at last fell, a torrent that forced Norik back into the cabin. Not only did he know nothing about sailing, but, clad in armor, he risked his life every time he neared the rail. It would take only one strong wave to toss him over the side. A soiled lantern swinging violently from the ceiling tried, desperately, to keep the cabin illuminated. Norik planted himself on the inside corner of the bunk and tried to think. He had not yet completely given up hope of escaping the cursed armor, but so far had no idea as to what to do. It would require powerful sorcery, and he knew no one with such abilities. If only he could have asked Faustin. The memory of what he had thought he had seen on the dock returned full-blown, sending renewed chills through Norik. Best to forget about Faustin, and Satan too. They were dead. Night came, and still the storm did not abate. Norik forced himself down to the mess, where he noticed for the first time some of the crew eyeing him with more than disinterest and disdain. Now a few gazes seemed almost hostile and yet frightened. Norik had no doubt that it had to do with the armor. Who was he, they must be wondering. The armor spoke of power, of command. Why did such a one as he travel on a miserable vessel such as the Hawksfire? Again, he took his meal to the cabin, preferring the solitary atmosphere. This time he found the food slightly more palatable, or perhaps the previous meals had just burned away his tongue. Norik devoured it, then fell back and tried to go to sleep. He did not look forward to sleep, both the dreams of Bartok and the nightmares surrounding the tomb not at all enticements. However, exhaustion quickly set in, and, as a veteran campaigner, Norik Viserin knew better than to try to fight it. Even the violent rocking of the Hawksfire could not keep his eyes from closing.
"It would be nice to rest,"
came a cracking yet still familiar voice.
But, after all, they say, no rest for the wicked, eh?
Norik bolted to his feet, eyes wide. Barely any light shone from the lantern, but even with what little he had, the soldier could see that no one else stood in the room. Damn! Another nightmare. Staring at the lantern, Norik realized that he must have fallen asleep without realizing it. The voice had been in his head, nowhere else. The voice of a comrade, now lost. Satan's voice. Thunder crashed. The Hawksfire shivered. Norik gripped the side of the cot, then started to ease himself back onto it.
You should have listened to Faustin, Norik. Now it may be too late.
He froze where he was, gaze shifting to the door.
Come to us, friend. Come to Faustin. And me.
Norik straightened. Satan? No reply, but some of the planks just outside the cabin creaked, as if someone walked upon them, and paused now before his door. Someone out there? The Hawksfire dipped, nearly sending him tumbling. Norik flattened himself against a wall, eyes never leaving the doorway. Had he imagined Trist's cracking, laboring voice? The days since the horror of the tomb had tested the veteran's nerve more than any battle in which he had fought, yet still something within urged Norik toward the door. Most likely when he opened it there would be nothing. Satan and the Viserai could not be out there, awaiting the friend who had so terribly murdered them. Such things did not happen, save in tales spoken in whispers around late-night campfires. But such things as the dreadful armor Norik wore did not happen outside of those tales either. Again, the planks creaked. Norik gritted his teeth, reached toward the latch. The gauntleted hand suddenly twitched and began to glow a sinister red. Norik drew the glove back, watching in wonder as the glow now faded. He reached forward once more, but this time nothing happened. Steeling himself, Norik undid the latch, then swung open the door. Rain and wind battered him, but no fearsome shade stood outside the cabin, bony finger outstretched in condemnation. Seizing his cloak, Norik hurried outside, his gaze immediately shifting first to the left, then the right. Toward the bow, he saw the dim shapes of men struggling to keep the sails in order, but of the supposed phantoms, he found not a trace. The hard tramping of feet made him look in the direction of the stern again, where he saw one of Casco's men running toward the bow. The man would have passed Norik without a glance, but the soldier seized him. Ignoring the sailor's fierce glare, he shouted, "Did you see anyone out here before you? Anyone standing by my cabin?" The sailor spat something in another tongue, then pulled away from Norik as if just touched by a leper. Norik watched the man run off, then shifted his own attention to the rail. A notion filled his head that he found entirely ludicrous, but still it made him risk fate by actually stepping to the edge and peering over the side. Waves shattered unceasingly against the time-worn hull of the Hawksfire, doing their best, it seemed, to pound through the wood and send the vessel and its occupants to their watery dooms. The sea beyond churned wildly, sometimes rising so high that Norik had trouble seeing the heavens. But of his supposed visitor, he saw no sign. No vengeful ghoul clung to the side of the hull. The unforgiving shades of Satan, Trist, and Faustin had not, after all, been standing outside his cabin door. He had imagined them, just as he had first believed. "You! What you do out? Inside! Inside!" The hobbling form of Captain Casco closed in on Norik from the bow. Casco seemed completely outraged that his sole passenger had dared the elements. Norik doubted it had to do with concern for the veteran's well-being. As with the rest of the crew, a hint of fright tinged Casco's angry words. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Wrong!" the cadaverous mariner barked back. "Wrong! Nothing wrong! Back to cabin! Storm outside, you fool!" Half tempted to respond yes to Casco's question, Norik did not bother to argue with the man. With the crippled mariner watching, he returned to the cabin, closing the door on Casco's scowling visage. After a moment, Norik heard him stump away. The thought of trying to fall asleep again did not at all appeal to Norik, but he nonetheless tried. At first, questions raced through his thoughts, all but one of which the veteran could answer. That lone question concerned the crimson gauntlet, and why it had begun to glow just prior to his going outside to search. If no danger had lurked beyond the door, what reason would the armor have for such a protective measure? True, it had not seized control of him, but still, its actions had appeared to have purpose. Norik fell asleep, still pondering the suit's reaction. He did not stir again until a crack of thunder that shook the cabin nearly caused him to tumble out of the makeshift bunk. Disoriented, the soldier tried and failed to calculate just how long he had been asleep. The storm still blew strong, which to Norik meant that it could not have been more than a few scant hours. Rarely had a storm that he had suffered through lasted more than a day, although he supposed that on the high sea it could be different. Arms and legs stiff, Norik stretched, then tried to go back to his slumber. A long, cracking sound, far different from thunder, again brought him to his feet. He recognized that sound, even if he had not heard it often. It had been the sound of wood breaking. And on a ship in the midst of a wild storm, that could spell doom for everyone. Norik burst out of the cabin, heading toward the bow. Shouts informed him that the crew already struggled to deal with whatever danger threatened, but he knew how difficult their task would be if what he suspected had truly occurred. Bad enough for the ship to suffer damage, but to try to repair it during such chaos? A moment later, his worst fears had been realized. Just ahead, several sailors fought to keep one of the masts from entirely cracking in two. They pulled on ropes, trying to force the upper portion in place, while other men attempted to strengthen the ruined area with planks, nails, and more rope. Norik, however, could already tell that theirs had become a struggle in futility. More and more the mast leaned dangerously, and when it went, the others would surely soon follow. He wanted to do something, but none of the skills he had learned would have been of aid to the more experienced mariners. Norik stared at the gauntleted hands, the crimson coloring making them look so mighty, so full of strength. Yet all the vaunted power of Bartek's legacy would avail him nothing now. The thought faded as an unsettling blue aura formed without warning around each glove. Norik suddenly found himself rushing forward, the suit again in command of his actions. For once, though, the veteran fought little against it, certain of its intentions, if not its methods. The armor desired to reach its distant destination, and it could not if it and Norik sank to the bottom of the sea. For Norik's life alone, it needed to act. "Away! Away!" shouted Captain Casco, no doubt certain that his clumsy passenger would just make a terrible situation worse. Norik, though, barged past him, nearly bowling the crippled mariner over. The mast creaked ominously, a sure sign that only seconds remained before it toppled into the next. Norik took a deep breath, anxiously waiting for the suit to act. "Kezra! Quezal! Irakus!" Lightning punctuated each word thrust from the soldier's mouth, but Norik paid it little mind. What he did notice, what all those around him also surely noticed, was that several shimmering green forms suddenly surrounded, even clung to, the ruined mast. They had strong, sleek arms that ended in suckered fingers, but where there should have been legs, the monstrosities had bodies reminiscent of gigantic slugs. The creatures hissed and crawled, their half-seen faces akin to some demented artist's idea of a bat made up like a clown, face paint and all. The sailors fled in panic, releasing their grip on the ropes and wood. The mast started to fall. The shimmering horde pushed it back in place. While some held it there, others started to crawl around and around the ruined area. As they moved, they left trails of slime over the cracks. At first, Norik had no idea what they intended, but then he noticed that the slime almost immediately hardened, strengthening and stabilizing the mast. Over and over the creatures crawled, a madcap race with no finish line. Their brethren, no longer needed to support the mast, watched and waited, hissing in what seemed encouragement to the ones circling around the pole. "Kezra! Quezal! Ranaka!" The demons quickly crawled from the mast, grouping together. Norik pulled his gaze from the horrific band, looking over their completed handiwork. Despite the storm, the mast now swayed as if only in a gentle breeze. Not only had they repaired it, but they had reinforced it in such a manner that the odds were it would better survive this voyage than the other two. As if also satisfied, the suit waved a negligent hand at the demons. A burst of light, so bright that Norik had to shield his eyes, covered the foul pack. The creatures' hissing grew stronger, harsher, until, with what seemed a sigh, the light faded out, leaving no trace of the slug-like beasts, not even a single trail of slime. Seemingly unimpressed, the storm battled on, tossing the hawk's fire about. Yet, despite the continued threat of it, the crew hesitated to return to their posts, only doing so when the captain finally shouted at them. The sailors who passed Norik gave the fighter a wide berth, their fear of him quite clear in their expressions. True, their lives had probably been spared because of the demons summoned, but to know that one who could call forth such horrific apparitions journeyed with them surely shook the men to the very core of their souls. Norik, however, did not care. So weary his legs threatened to collapse underneath him. Even though it had been the suit that had cast the spell, he suddenly felt as if he had just rebuilt the entire mast single-handedly. Norik waited for the armor to guide him back to the cabin, but now that the danger had been dealt with, apparently it had left matters to him. The metal plate felt like 1,000 pounds as he turned and walked from the deck. Around him, Norik continued to feel the uneasy stares of the crew of the Hawksfire. No doubt they would soon even forget that they owed their lives to his presence, and begin to consider what it meant to have a master of demons aboard. Fear had a way of turning to violence. Yet, despite that knowledge, Norik sought only his bed. He very desperately needed sleep. Even the storm would not be able to keep him awake now. Come the morrow, he would do what he could to explain what had happened. Norik only hoped that in the meantime, none of the crew would attempt anything foolish and fatal. Darkness. Warm, enveloping darkness. Kara nestled in it, dwelled in it, found it so comforting that for the longest time she had no desire to leave it. Yet there came a point when something, an uneasy feeling, a sense of foreboding, made her turn, shift, and try to wake. She also heard a voice. "Kara! Lass! Where are you?" The voice had a familiarity to it, one that slowly drew her up from oblivion. As she tried to awaken, Kara Nightshadow's own will aided in the task. This darkness, this nothingness, held her prisoner. The comfort it offered was a smothering one, an eternal sleep. "Kara!" It no longer even comforted. Now it scratched, crushed, felt more akin to a casket than a soft bed. "Kara!" The necromancer's eyes flew open. She stood imprisoned in a tomb of wood, her limbs seemingly frozen. Somewhere, a hound barked. The necromancer blinked, trying to focus better. A few cracks of dim light shone through, just enough to enable her to better understand what had become of her. Wood tightly surrounded her on all sides, a hollow tree without major openings. Somehow, she had been placed here, sealed in here. To die? A sense of claustrophobia nearly overwhelmed her. Kara struggled to move her arms, but could not. They had been pinned to her sides and wrapped by vegetation growing in the hollow tree. Worse, moss also covered her mouth, sealing her lips together. She tried to make a sound, but muffled by both the moss and the thick trunk, Kara knew that no one outside would hear her. More hounds barked, this time nearer. She fixed on a voice, Captain Geronen's voice, calling her name. "Kara! Lass! Can you hear me?" Her legs also could not move. likely for the same reasons as her arms. Physically, Kara had been left completely helpless. The sense of claustrophobia grew. Although the necromancer had lived much of her short life in seclusion, she had always had freedom of movement, freedom of choice. Her ghoulish attackers had left her without either. Why they had not slain her outright, the desperate dark mage could not say, but if she did not soon escape, her demise would be just as certain, and in a far slower, grislier fashion. And that thought, accompanied by her growing feeling that the tree trunk closed in on her from all sides, pushed Kara as none of her teachers had ever. She wanted to escape, to be free, to not suffer the slow tortures of starvation. Bound as she was, with even her mouth sealed, no sophisticated spell could save her. Yet raw emotion, so generally kept under control by the followers of Rathma, now bubbled up, demanded to overflow. Kara stared at the wood before her, seeing it as her nemesis, her own tomb. She would not die this way, not through the dark magic of an undead sorcerer, not die this way. The interior of the trunk grew hot, stifling. Sweat dripped over the necromancer. The vegetation seemed to tighten around her limbs. Not die. Her silver eyes flashed bright. Brighter. The tree exploded. Fragments of wood flew in all directions, bombarding the nearby landscape. Somewhere, Kara heard men swear and dogs whine. She could do nothing for them, though, and in truth could do no more for herself. The necromancer fell forward, her arms and legs no longer hindered. The instinctive reaction to put her hands out to save herself kept Kara from striking the ground head first, but did not prevent the jolt when her body hit from causing her to momentarily black out. Vaguely, she heard voices that seemed to draw near. A beast sniffed the ground near her head, its cold nose briefly rubbing against her ear. She heard a command, then felt strong but gentle hands touch her shoulders. "Kara, what in the name of the sea witch happened to you, lass?" "Charon?" she managed to utter, the effort nearly doing her in again. "Easy, lass. Here, you fool, take the dog's leashes. I'll see to her." "Aye, Captain." Kara barely noticed the journey back to Gea Cool, save for one moment when the innkeeper, who carried her in his arms, swore at one of his companions for nearly letting the dogs trip him. She drifted into and out of consciousness, now and then recalling her short glimpses of the two undead. Something about them had greatly disturbed her, more than she would have imagined possible. Even in her present state, it went through Kara's mind that they had been invisible to her senses, that they had played her, not the other way around. Necromancers manipulated the forces of life and death, not the other way around. Yet the Viserai and his grinning companion had toyed with Kara, as if she had been less than a first-year novice. How? More to the point, why did they walk the world at all? The answer had to deal with her earlier error in the tomb. Somehow, although her training had never covered such astounding occurrences, when she had left the phantasm alone, it had been able to seize full control of the body. Then it must have summoned the companion it had known in life, the pair vanishing by magic before she returned. A simple explanation, and yet not at all satisfactory. Kara missed something. She felt sure of it. "Enchantress!" The word echoed in her skull, drowning out her thoughts. She forced her eyelids open, which Kara had not even realized until now had been closed, and stared up at the concerned visage of Captain Hannes Geronan. "What?" "Easy, lass. You've gone 2 days without food and water. Not enough to do you any real harm, but still too much for your own good." 2 days? She had been trapped in the tree for 2 days? "When you vanished that night, I started a search right away, but not until morn came did I find this pouch near the side of the inn." He held up a small leather pouch, in which Kara stored some of the herbs necessary for her calling. Necromancer spells required other ingredients besides blood, although most outsiders never knew that. Odd, though, that she should lose that pouch. It would have almost required her captors to spend precious time to tear it off. So securely had the young spellcaster generally kept it fastened. Of course, that made even less sense, since the only reason that they would bother to do that might be to actually leave a clue to her kidnapping. Hardly something either ghoul would have done. But then, they had left her alive, if buried in the heart of a dead tree. She felt so confused. Her irritation must have shown, for the innkeeper immediately sought to aid her.
"What is it? Need more water? Blankets?"
Her words sounded more akin to the croaking of a frog, or too much like her more vocal assailant. Kara gratefully accepted water, then tried again. "I am all right, Captain, and I thank you for your care. I will, of course, pay you."
"I don't like foul language in my establishment, milady. There'll be no more talk of that."
He truly was a curiosity to her. "Captain Geronin, most folk, especially Westerners, would rather have left one of my kind to rot in that tree, much less put together a search party. Why do this?" The huge man looked uncomfortable.
"Always watch over my guests, lass."
Despite the aches throughout her body, she pushed herself up to a sitting position. Geronin had given her a room such as she could not have imagined in Gaia-Kul, clean and comfortable, with no odor of fish either. Truly a marvel. Yet Kara did not let her pleasant surroundings deter her from her question. "Why do it, Captain?"
"I had me a daughter once," he began with much reluctance. "And before you think it, she looked not a bit like you, save and also being pretty."
Geronin cleared his throat.
"Her mother was higher born than me, but my naval successes let me rise to where we could wed. Tarania was born to us, but her mother never lived much beyond carrying her."
A daring tear emerged from the gruff man's eye, one the innkeeper quickly brushed out of existence.
"For the next decade and more, I couldn't stand my life because it tore me away from the only one left to me. Finally, I resigned my commission when she was just beginning to blossom into a fair maiden, and took her across the sea to a place I remembered being so beautiful. Bless her, Tarania never complained, even seemed to thrive here."
"Gaia-Kul?"
"Don't sound so surprised, lass. Was a much nicer, cleaner place a decade ago. Something foul has touched it since, just as it's touched every other place I hear of these days."
Kara carefully kept her expression neutral. As one of the faithful of Rathma, she knew well that dark powers had begun to spread over the world. The ransacking of Bartek's tomb only exemplified that fact. The necromancers feared that soon the world would slip out of the delicate balance it needed to maintain, that the tide would shift toward the lords of hell, that demons already walked the world again. Captain Geronin had been talking while she had considered all of this, and so Kara had missed his past few words. However, something at the end caught her attention, so much so that she had to blurt, "What?" By now, his face had turned grim, so very grim.
"Aye, that's what happened, all right. 2 years we lived here, happy as could be possible. Then one night I heard her scream from her room, a place no man could get without passing me first. Smashed through her door, I did, and found no trace of her. Her window remained locked, her closet I searched well, but she'd somehow vanished from a room with no other good exit."
Geronin had searched high and low for his daughter, several of the locals more than willing to join the hunt. For 3 days he had looked, and for 3 days he had failed, until one night, as he tried to sleep, the captain had heard his daughter calling to him. A cautious man, despite his desperate hopes, he had taken with him the ceremonial blade awarded to him by his admiral. With it, the innkeeper had gone out into the wilds, following the call of his child. For more than an hour, he had trekked through the woods and hills, seeking, searching. Finally, near a crooked tree, he had caught sight of his beloved Tarania. The girl, her skin so oddly pale, even more so than Kara's, had stood waiting for her father with arms outstretched. She had called out to him again, and Geronin had, of course, responded. Sword in one hand, he had taken his daughter close. Her fangs had nearly ripped out his throat. Captain Geronin had sailed the world, had seen many a marvelous and disturbing thing, had fought pirates and villains in the name of his masters, but no experience in his life had meant more to him than raising his only child. And nothing had ripped at his soul more than running the creature she had become through the heart. "It hangs downstairs," he muttered, finishing. "A fine piece of craftsmanship, and designed to be practical, too." Almost as an afterthought, the captain added, "Plated in silver, or else I'd not be here with you today." What happened to her? Kara knew such tales, but the causes varied. "The damned thing is I never found out. Finally managed to push it to the back of my mind until you vanished. Feared that it had come back for you." A daring tear escaped his eyes. "I still hear her cries, both the one when she vanished and the one when I slew her." Geronin's unknown horror had not stalked Kara, but the two undead tomb robbers had certainly been waiting, which drew her at last back to her own immediate situation. "Forgive me, Captain, for sounding so uncaring about your great loss, but can you tell me if any ships departed during the time I was lost?" Kara's question caught the grieving man off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Only ship that sailed off so far has been the Hawksfire, a cursed vessel if I've ever seen one. Surprised it hasn't sunk yet." Only a single ship had departed. It had to be the one she wanted. Where was it heading? "Lut Gholein. It always sails to Lut Gholein." She knew the name. A prospering kingdom on the western side of the Twin Seas, a place where merchants from all over the world bought and sold. Lut Gholein. The Viserai and his grinning friend had trekked all the way here from the tomb, moving at a pace only those who felt no exhaustion could maintain. They had specifically come to Gea Kul, whose only good purpose served as a point by which to reach other realms. But why? There could be only one reason. They pursued the remaining members of their party, the ones who also carried with them Bartek's armor. Kara suspected that might be only one man, but she had to keep in mind the possibility of more. So this Hawksfire carried either the survivors or the revenants. If the latter, the pair would have to have secreted themselves carefully in order to avoid detection. But she had heard tales of the undead doing whatever they needed while pursuing their victims. Crossing the sea would be difficult, but not impossible. Lut Gholein. It might yet be only another brief stop, but at least Kara had a particular destination. "Captain, when is the next ship sailing there?" "Lass, you're barely able to sit up, much less—" Silver eyes fixed, unblinking at him. "When?" He rubbed his chin. Not for a time. Maybe a week, maybe more." Much too late. By then, both the revenants and those they pursued would be long gone, the armor with them. Even more important than her dagger remained the fact that the bloody warlord's suit moved about. The enchantments within would certainly call out to the ambitious, the evil, even those not necessarily human. "I have funds. Can you recommend a ship I could hire?" Geronin eyed her for a moment. "This is that important?" "More than you can imagine." With a sigh, the innkeeper replied, "There's a small but sleek vessel, the King's Shield, near the northernmost end of the port. She can sail at any time. Just need a day or two to gather the crew and supplies together." "Do you think you can convince the owner to hear me out?" This caused Geronin to laugh hard. "No need to worry about that, my lady. He's a man who used to follow many a cause, so long as it was a good one." Her hopes rose. Already she felt nearly well enough to travel. The Hawksfire had a few days' head start, but with a good ship, Kara might be able to arrive in Lut Gholein in but a short time after. Her unique skills, combined with a few careful questions, should enable her to follow the trail from there. I need to talk with him. I must be able to leave by tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning?
Again, she gave him that gaze. Kara regretted pushing, but more than her health and the patience of this other captain were at stake. It must be so.
All right. He shook his head. I'll get everything ready. We'll set sail in the morning.
Kara was touched by his sudden offer. It is more than enough that you can convince the King's Shield's captain to take this journey. But you need not tear yourself from your beloved inn. This is no longer your concern.
I don't like when my guests are nearly killed. Or worse, lass. Besides, I've been too long on dry land. Be good to feel the sea again.
He leaned nearer, giving her a smile.
And as for convincing the captain, I don't think you understand me yet, Enchantress. I'm owner of that fine vessel, and by all that's holy, I'll see that she sets sail in the morning, or I promise you that there'll truly be hell to pay.
As he hurried off to see to arrangements, Kara slumped down, caught by his last words. Hell to pay? Captain Hannos Geronin had no idea just how fateful his oath just might end up being.